it's time to review the Paths of Prophecy rival deck. So sit back and enjoy, or don't. But I'm gonna start now anyway. I'm gonna start with the searches. First up, we have all a part of the plan. You score it immediately after an opponent's activation step if the value of objectives your warband holds adds up to a number greater than the number of surviving fighters. Against some opponents early on, it will obviously be quite hard, and there are some stuff in the deck to help us raise the value of objectives, and that's something we haven't seen before, but I'll get to that shortly. Next up, we have Devoted Offerings. It's a hybrid, and you score it immediately after you play your third or subsequent ploy in the same action phase, or you draw your third or subsequent power card in the same action phase. The second part there is obviously quite in your control if you need to, but there are also stuff in the deck to help score it much faster than actually using reactivations to draw cards. So it is indeed quite strong. Next up, we have Hanging On. It's a duel. You score it immediately after an opponent's activation step. If one or more friendly fighters are each holding an objective in enemy territory, and one or more of those fighters have 2 or more move tokens. This needs us to be holding objectives, and that rules out beasts, but there is even stuff in the deck to disregard the fact that we are beasts for the purpose of holding objectives. So it could be scored with something like the beasts in the Exiled, for example. Second move, it's certainly not impossible to do, right? We could use a Scurry for our first move and then move regularly, for example, with using the Gits. There's loads of examples here, and there's also stuff that lets us do moves as ploy freebie, as it were, so it's also quite scoreable. Then we have Held in a Bloody Fist. It's a duel. You score it immediately after an opponent's activation step if one or more friendly fighters are each holding one or more objectives, and one or more of those fighters have one or more wound counters. That seems pretty scoreable as well, right? It is after an opponent's activation step, but it's pretty scoreable. Next up, we have Prevention Over Cure. It's scored immediately after an opponent's activation step if there are more enemy fighters out of action than the number of objectives held by each enemy warband. The number of objectives, so not the value then. So say we are meeting a 4-man warband at some point during the game. There probably only will be 2 left, so that number needs to be higher than the number of surviving fighters holding objectives, and that seems pretty doable, right? But it's gonna be a bit matchup dependent. Your Lucky Day, it's a duel. You scored immediately after an opponent's activation step if the value of objective your warband holds add up to 7 precisely. For example, 5 and 2, 4 and 3, and one or more enemy fighters are out of action. And there are stuff in the deck to manipulate the value of objectives as well. It's obviously a bit harder, given that it's a 2 glory search, but it's not impossible. Then we have the end phases. First up, we have a 1 glory end phase. It's a hybrid. It's called a Dire Omen. You scored in an end phase if your warband holds objective number 5, or the value of objectives your warband holds adds up to 5 precisely. For example, 2 and 3 or 1 and 4. Maybe it's a bit too hard for 1 glory, I don't know. Then we have a Sign from the Gods. It's scored in an end phase, and it's a hybrid. Scored if your warband holds objective 3 or your warband holds objective 1 and 2. That seems pretty doable, right? Complete Harmony. It's a hybrid. It's scored in an end phase if your warband holds each objective, or the value of objectives your warband holds adds up to 15 precisely. For example, 5, 6, and 4. It seems weird, right? Because there's not an objective number 6, unless you're playing a 3-player mode game. But as I said, there is stuff to manipulate the value of objectives. It's pretty hard though, and hence it's 5 glory, probably not going to be scored a lot of times. Portents of Doom. You scored in an end phase if the value of objectives your warband holds adds up to 9 precisely. For example, 5, 4, or 1 and 3, and 5. Yeah. When you score this objective, if your warband holds 3 or more objectives, gain 1 additional glory points. Yeah, it's easier than the last one, but still quite tricky, right? Positive Foreboding, it's scored in an end phase if your warband holds more objectives than each other warband. It should probably be doable with such a hold objective focused deck, right? It's just one glory though, and you also need to fulfill the condition that one or more of those objectives are within 2 hexes of no one's territory, but that's hardly very hard, right? 2 hexes from no one's territory is quite generous. Then we have the deploys. PACT sealed in blood. Choose a friendly fighter that is holding an objective. Deal 1 damage to the chosen fighter. After that fighter is dealt damage. If your warband holds 3 or more objectives, draw 3 power cards. So that helps us score. Held in a bloody fist helps us score devoted offerings as well, right? With both of those conditions probably, but drawing your 3rd or subsequent power card in the same action phase is really doable with that power card. Then we have bursting power. Pick an objective token, roll 1 magic dice for each fighter within 1 hex of that objective token. On a roll of channel, deal 1 damage to that fighter. It's a 50-50 card basically, and you're probably not gonna be able to target that many fighters, but that also helps us score held in a bloody fist. Then we have dangerous objects. Stagger each enemy fighter that's within 1 hex of an objective token the warband does not hold. Yeah, I'm generally not a huge fan of stagger. Do we have anything in the objective pile that actually needs us to stagger stuff, right? Not really, so maybe it seems a bit redundant. And then we have easily distracted. Choose an enemy fighter, push the chosen fighter 1 hex, then pick 1 opponent. That opponent chooses another fighter. They push the chosen fighter up to 2 hexes. Unless you have a very specific reason for pushing that specific fighter, so good a reason that you can live with them pushing your fighter 2 hexes in return. Maybe I'm missing something here. Then we have Fair Fortune. Choose a friendly fighter. Give the chosen fighter an upgrade from your hand. Do not spend any glory points when you play that card. When you play this card, if your warband holds 3 or more objectives, draw 1 power card. That also helps us score the devoted offerings. Then we have Inconstant Predictions. Choose up to 2 friendly fighters. Give each chosen fighter 1 guard token and stagger each other friendly fighter. Well, if you only have 2, it's pretty good, yeah? It could help us score like Patience of the Mountains with Maoris, for example. A Reversal of Fate. Pick a feature token within 2 hexes of a friendly fighter. Flip that feature token. We don't have anything with flipping objectives, but it could help us score holding more than the opponent. A positive foreboding. Then we have Slinking in there. Choose a friendly fighter. Push the chosen fighter 1 hex. Push the chosen fighter up to 2 hexes instead if the chosen fighter would end that push on an objective token. Well, it's obviously just a strong card, right? We don't need any excuses to include that card. Succor Uncertainty is choose a friendly fighter. Heal 1 the chosen fighter. Heal 2 the chosen fighter instead if your warband holds 3 or more objectives. Heal is a bit of a yawn for me personally, but sure, it doesn't hurt. It's actually quite the contrary. Tread the Path. Choose a friendly fighter. The chosen fighter makes a move action. The chosen fighter's move characteristic is X for that move action, where X is the number of objectives your warband was holding when this card was played. So that helps score us. Hanging on. Score this immediately after the opponent's activation step if 1 or more friendly fighters are each holding an objective token, and 1 or more of those fighters have 2 more move tokens. So that's the gambits, and then we move on to the upgrades. And first up we have Absolute Incredulity. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that 100% correct, or even 5% correct. Objectives held by this fighter cannot be flipped or moved. That feels pretty nice, right? But it's not all that often that opponent flips your tokens, but sure, it can happen, and it feels bad when it does. Yeah, I don't know what to say. It's very occasionally useful. Deadly Defiance. Reaction after an activation step in which this fighter's attack action dealt damage to an enemy fighter, or in which this fighter was dealt damage. Push this fighter 1 hex. Yeah, that's pretty strong, right? Pushes are always nice and helps us get on objectives. Guided by Fate is +1 dice for this fighter's attack action if this fighter and or the target is on a feature token. That seems like something that will happen a lot when you play this deck, especially if you're meeting someone playing Fearsome Fortress or whatever. It's gonna trigger a lot, so it's a pretty strong card. Inviolate Prophet. -1 dice to a minimum of 1 from attack actions that target this fighter if the attacker is not adjacent to this fighter and this fighter is holding an objective. That's a lot of conditions. Most attacks will be adjacent, so I guess I'm not a huge fan. Protected by the Unseen is +1 defense while this fighter is holding an objective with a value of 4, 5 or 6. As I said, there is stuff that could alter the value, and we are getting to those shortly, but it's pretty occasional, right? A Stubborn Stance. This fighter cannot be pushed. That's pretty nice in a deck like this. But do remember, you can't push the fighter either. The Helping a Hand gives us an action. Pick 2 feature tokens. Place each feature token in the hex the other feature token was in when you pick them. Then break this card. It's a pretty nice card to have when you need to hold specific values or objectives. Unhallowed Aura. While this fighter is holding an objective, that objective is considered to have a value of 6. At the start of a round, break this card. Reaction. Use this after this fighter's activation. If you do, break this card. So if you need to not hold 6 anymore, you could just break it. A pretty interesting card, right? Then we have Watchful Eye. At the start of the end phase, before you or an opponent scores objective cards, you can add or subtract 1 to a minimum of 0 from the value of an objective token this fighter is holding until the end of that phase. Yeah, that helps score us a plethora of cards. So do I think this deck is good? It probably is pretty decent. Does it take a lot of thinking? Probably yes. Is it beginner friendly? Probably no. I think there are probably worse decks for beginners, but it's probably not your go-to rival deck for a beginner. Probably go with something like Tooth and Claw for a beginner, I guess. But I think it looks pretty interesting, and I do like that hold objective specifically is back and not just be on feature tokens. And so yeah, I'm excited to try the deck out, and I probably will order this one. It's very hard for me to rate this. It's probably a middle of the road kind of a deck, but it could prove really strong, and if you mix it with other stuff, I guess it could be really nice. The fact that it does not have a plot card is always very, very good for people like me who like to play championship and deck build to the full extent of the word. So that's good news, right? So I think it looks pretty interesting and stuff we haven't seen before, like manipulating the values of objectives. So pretty nice to see some new ideas being utilized here. So that is it for me today. Inviolate Prophet. Inviolate Prophet. This is Mats again, chiming in to thank you for watching the video. Please don't forget to subscribe, like and comment, and to not miss out on future content, ring the bell as well. And if you really liked this video, feel free to click the thanks button just below this video. And if you want to support me even further, you can now become a channel member and claim the title of Critical Focus Fan. Until next time, take care, bye.